Well, Health Minister Mark Butler recently signalled changes to Medicare and urgent care clinics as part of Labor's election pitch in the lead up to this year's federal poll. It comes as new data reveals working Australians are paying more to see a GP than they were 12 months ago. Surprise, surprise. They're also being hit with higher gap fees and fewer appointments are now fully covered. For more on this, I'm joined by the Spectator contributor, Terry Barnes. Terry, it was only days ago I was talking about Labor resurrecting the Medicare campaign against Peter Dutton, but it seems like the real horror story here is their own track record.
Yes, and Happy New Year, James. Look, I think the Labor government, Mark Butler as Health Minister, are really doing the smoke and mirrors thing, focusing on bulk billing, focusing on their urgent care clinics, which really cut the lunch of general practitioners and general practices across the country in terms of viability, in terms of getting GPs to actually do the job on a day-to-day basis. But certainly I think if you look at what Labor's done over the last 3 years, they haven't really done much at all. They've tinkered here, they've tinkered there, they've trod water, but they haven't actually really done much to reform the system, both public and private. And they haven't really done much except deal with the politics of bulk billing. And I think the longer that goes on, the longer that both sides of politics think that bulk billing is the nirvana, getting the bulk billing rate up is the nirvana, we're not actually going to get serious reform anywhere else. And we do have problems with hospitals, we do have problems with general practice and primary care. And as some of the AMA and other health groups have been pointing out, we don't do enough in terms of prevention. And I think dollars spent on prevention save thousands, even millions of dollars down the track in terms of other care. But on the other hand, I mean, it's the nanny state wanting to tell us what to do. So I think we've got to get the balance right there. But in terms of the politics, I think Labor is dressing it up. In terms of the other side, though, in terms of the coalition, where have they been for the last 3 years? I haven't seen anything of any note from the Shadow Minister, Anne Ruston. I think it's important that the coalition actually lays down where it wants to go with health and healthcare if it wants to actually win the next election.
Yeah, well, as well as health, obviously energy is going to be a big issue come the next election. Power company bosses say investors are pulling out of Australia in favour of countries with more stable and supportive policies, which is just an incredible thing to think that businesses now see Australia as a risk. Terry, things are pretty bad now when even the power companies are calling for the government to come in and do something, even as far as regulation, to make things more stable.
Well, that's right. I mean, basically, the government, for all its commitment to net zero by 2050 and everything else, seems to not know whether it's Arthur or Martha when it comes to actually how it's going to get there. And certainly energy providers and companies and investors who want to operate in this space want to have some clarity. They want regulation. Well, but then again, I see that all of those have commented have really taken the net zero by 2050 Kool-Aid, haven't they? I mean, they have treated that as a bit of a nirvana in itself. And certainly I think the one thing I did notice about all those whining operators and investors is that they did not mention nuclear at any stage. So, or traditional fossil fuels and how they fit into the overall scheme of things. And I think really what they need to do is accept that there's not just one narrow band of future energy source, there is a broad band. And we haven't seen that from them because they're still decided to stick with the Labor government, not actually open their minds to anything else. And really, again, I think the best way to sort out this regulatory issue they're complaining about is to actually have an election and one side or another gets the mandate.
Well, the other big issue when it comes to energy, of course, is the kind of vehicles we drive. Labor have just introduced a vehicle efficiency standard, which is going to jack up the cost of cars in all likelihood. But the federal government at the same time says it will help finance low-interest loans to help people get into electric vehicles. So the Commonwealth Bank is reportedly receiving $150 million from the federal government to offer low-interest loans for workers earning less than $100,000 a year, as well as essential workers, including police officers, teachers, firefighters and nurses. Terry, this whole EV industry is essentially bankrolled on subsidies.
EV or not EV, that is the question, James? But certainly, look, in terms of the first one, David Littleproud, the National Party leader, is right. I mean, if the government imposes these emissions penalties on manufacturers, It's not them who's going to pay it. Ultimately, it's going to be the consumers who buy their product or don't buy their product. In terms of the EV loans, I just think, did Henry Ford get the government to subsidise the Model T and how that rolled out? I mean, it came down to private enterprise and doing it right and actually working out what the market wanted and what consumers wanted. And with electric vehicles, they're expensive to buy relative to internal combustion vehicles. They say they're cheaper to run over time, but really, if you're going to make them worthwhile, you don't subsidise them, you don't subsidise loans, you actually make them cheaper to buy by making them more efficient and in terms of production, in terms of distribution. And really, I think Elon Musk with Tesla or any other EV operator should actually get on with the job of making sure that those vehicles are cheap and accessible to consumers. But the infrastructure behind them is a factor here as well. I mean, if people on lower incomes can't afford to be able to plug in those electric vehicles that they buy with those subsidised loans, what's the point of doing it in the first place?
Yeah, well, the thing that scares me, Terry, is when you've got the Albanese government picking winners and losers. Do you really trust them to get that right? I'm not so sure. Terry Barnes, thanks for joining me tonight.